officially started, I would like to introduce Carol Snow to the commission. She is our newest member. She's replacing Dr. Hay, who vacated her alternate seat. So Carol, welcome. It's great to have you on board and look forward to working with you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I think I'm supposed to give a quick bio. So
well, I was going to ask you if you want to, so we can be a little bit familiar.
Good idea.
Anyway. You know, you're in kind of trouble already finding out you have Peter Roos as a neighbor. That's a demerit, right?
So yeah, and to make it worse, I grew up in Madison, graduate of Daniel Hand High School.
Wow.
And when I graduated, I swore I would never come back to this horrible place, like many students at that time, and lived as far away as I could. I'm a conservator of material culture objects, and I've worked on archaeological excavations around the Mediterranean mostly, and in major East Coast museums. My last job was at the Yale University Art Gallery, where I retired from being deputy chief conservator in 2019. And so in thinking about this quick recap about me, I realized that I bring a unique perspective to the board in that I've seen what the built environment looks like in thousands of years from now. By having worked on classical and Bronze Age sites, I know what happens when things fall down and get buried. So there you go.
Well, welcome. I look forward to serving with you. With that, why don't we move on to the meeting, to our first item, and that is a discussion with our two state legislators, Senator Christine Cohen and Representative John Michael Parker. I think, as we know, and it seems every day more folks in town find out that there are some bills pending up in Hartford that affect land use and land use policy, and looking to our two representatives for an update and sharing their perspectives on this legislation. So with that, I will turn it over to Senator Cohen and Representative Parker. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. John Michael, you want me to start? You want to start? I suspect there'll be a lot of some questions that we can address that perhaps the PMZ Commission have. So, I think if we just give a brief overview and then open it up to some questions.
Okay.
So I'm pleased to be here tonight. I've always wanted to attend one of the meetings, and I know I have been scheduled in the past, and session always seems to get in the way. My public hearings and whatnot, it's an unpredictable schedule, and even more so right now, which is interesting because we're doing everything virtually. So, we could have, 2 or 3 public hearings or meetings happening concurrently and have them all streaming on our computers at the same time. So, but I'm glad tonight there was the opportunity to be with you all, and looking forward to hearing some of the questions and working with you all going forward. There is a lot of legislation out there. I'll just remind everybody it's really early on in the season, the session rather, or legislative season. But we are, at the point where bill proposals are being raised by committees. Many have passed the raise bill deadline. So most of the bill proposals that are out there that are going to be raised by a committee and moving forward have, that's happened at this point already. If there, I know Dave had sent along a list of all the bill proposals, and you can see there's just hundreds and hundreds, there's actually thousands of bill proposals that happen in any given session, and most of those are dead at this point. So you'll see a very small number that actually make it their way to a public hearing process, and then from the public hearing process, they'll have to be joint favorable out of committee and then brought to either the House or the Senate floor for deliberation, and then going to the other chamber once it passes the first chamber. So they all have a long way to travel. There are likely to be many iterations of the bills that we're seeing at this point. prior to their passage, if they make it to passage. We all know that fun little skit, how a bill becomes a law. It's a very long process to get through. But we do have some things that are going on. There's a lot of talk around affordable housing. There's a lot going on with adding dwelling units to those affordable housing requirements and allowing those to be counted as property. There's a lot happening by way of property taxes, payment in lieu of taxes for municipalities, which is actually good news at this point. The trick is going to be figuring out how to fund it. So it's looking like both the House and the Senate went in to approve a bill that would increase pilot funding, from the 25% that is typical and abysmal and to much higher levels of 30, 40, and 50% rates. So we'll have to see as the session goes on what the funding mechanism is for that. And there are a number of different proposals on the table for how that will be funded going forward. I'm the Senate Chair of the Environment Committee, and as such, there is quite a large package from the Governor's Office on climate adaptation. I have a particular interest in coastal resiliency. I obviously represent 3 coastal towns as well as 3 inland towns, and have been hard at work on coastal resiliency projects since I got up to the Capitol in 2019. We passed some legislation in 2019 allowing municipalities to set aside funding for coastal resiliency. And we are looking to do more, to enable municipal governments to really shape how they shore up their coastline and plan for future disaster, and also to mitigate, the impacts of sea level rise, which we know is imminent at this point. I think it's 20 inches over the next 20 years that we're looking at. So, and that's if we, do nothing to. That's regardless of whether we, make some changes to mitigate the impacts of sea level rise or not. That 20 inches is something that we're going to have to contend with. So I think a lot of you heard last session probably about the local option of a buyer's conveyance fee. The governor's bill would expand that. So, if there were a buyer's conveyance fee added, municipalities would have the choice of whether to put that into land preservation or coastal resiliency projects. And so that's something that, we'll be hearing before the Environment Committee on Monday. I don't know, John Michael, do you want to get into some of the affordable housing stuff? I know that you had some information on that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Christine. And nice to see everyone tonight. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. I'll just say briefly, because I'm newer to this than Christine is, I have the privilege of serving as your state rep. I started this session up in Hartford. I get to work with Christine on the Environment Committee and have one of the best chairs there. So looking forward to getting to work with Christine on all of the coastal and otherwise issues. I also serve on education and on public health. So at this point, a lot of my time has been focused on some of those issues and these marathon public hearings we keep having. So I would just first reiterate sort of what Christine has shared, and I'm learning very quickly, how long this process is and how many twists and turns bills take if they even get over the starting line. And so to me, at this point in the session, it might be really valuable to get to hear questions or concerns or feedback that you folks have that, can sort of inform what we keep an eye out for, or if issues come before our committees and we have the chance to vote on them, we can do so in an informed way with what's on everyone's minds. And certainly as we go through the session and we get down to some specific bills that we might be taking final votes on, would be happy to reconnect. I've had a lot of conversations with folks in town that have reached out about some of the urgent things coming across my committees already. So I think everyone knows how to, hopefully how to reach me for that. Ron and or Dave, you can certainly share my contact again, and we'd be happy to have follow-ups with people. So that's sort of my overview. In terms of the affordable housing, I mean, I know a lot of the work from Desegregate Connecticut is getting some headlines, and I actually asked folks over there to give me some information about impact on Madison of what they're thinking is going to come through. But again, that bill hasn't even come totally through the process yet to be able to look at and work on. But I'd be happy to share some of the data that I was able to pull on that. But before I dive right into that, maybe we can pause and see if Ron or Dave or anyone else wants to guide the conversation a little bit, or big topics you want us to hit on. Really, where I think for me, here to listen and learn, and certainly to be helpful in providing information if we can.
Thank you, John Michael. Any questions from commission members? I know we have some.
Ron, I've got one just that I think might help frame the conversation. Is Representative Parker gets into the discussion, particularly on affordable housing, and in some of the proposed changes that Desegregate Connecticut has had. I'm curious in terms of what the specific problems are that this legislation is intended to solve for, and not the broad, having a diverse population, etc. But I really, I'd like to understand the depth behind the motivation to remove local control and apply state control over land use. And you don't have to address it now. Just if you can weave that into your discussion, would be great.
I can respond with some thoughts on that, but if anyone else wants to put out other initial thoughts out there, I can pause.
Ron? Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I just a couple thoughts. We have formed this ad hoc affordable housing committee for the town of Madison, and I actually volunteered to be the planning and zoning rep for that committee. And I think we have our first meeting tomorrow with the full committee, and so we'll be off and running. But I think affordable housing is important. My perspective is that I moved here almost 6 years ago from San Francisco, and affordable housing was a huge issue there, even out in the suburbs where I lived. My kids were instructed by teachers who couldn't afford to live in the district where they taught my kids. And the same goes with law enforcement and firefighters and a lot of jobs like that. And I think it's a fact that affordable housing does lead, to new jobs, higher sales taxes. We retain people that grow up in this town, like Carol, to stay here because housing is affordable. It enables people to downsize when they're seniors if they want to, but frankly, incomes have not kept pace with housing costs, so we just drive people away. So I think it's really important that we have and then we encourage, responsible affordable housing for Madison and the shoreline. And I'm really certain that this committee and others working on the same project will come up with a very responsible plan. And a lot of that's going to take, and we have to work with everybody on this, it's just educating people why affordable housing is good for Madison. That's a long windup for, I guess, my other comment, and that would be the thought that government, though, could come in and enforce as of right affordable housing makes me extraordinarily nervous. It means developments could be approved by staff without public hearings and no intervention from the local P&Z. The state would come with their own agenda, including projects with perhaps much more increased density, and they really wouldn't care about the impact it has on our community. So I guess what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, let these committees that are all being formed to meet the deadline by middle of next year do their work to come up with good, well-constructed, affordable housing plans. They can be done. Salisbury's got one that's really quite excellent, as does Essex, and they've made improvement and have started to make progress on their plans, particularly Essex. So it can be done, but I think it's best left to people in the local realm, not Hartford. So having said all that, though, I really appreciate both of you coming here tonight and hearing what we have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else?
I was just going to thank you, Peter, for that, because I think you answered Tom's question the way that I would have answered it with your introduction to that comment. And I think a lot of legislators, including myself, share your concerns over relinquishing local control over some of these things. Especially, the impacts of, just not understanding the differences from town to town. And particularly coastal towns. I think it's very important that we're paying attention to the needs and building code. And, traditionally, we haven't seen the level of affordable housing that we would want to see. And when I say we, I just say generally as a state and state government to bring folks in from other towns, give opportunity for jobs and education and community to the extent that we'd like to see that happen. And so I think ensuring that local housing authorities and boards and commissions are able to come up with a plan to get that done, I think is incredibly important, while not imposing these strict must have, this number of buildings, this number of units by such and such a date. I think that's really the way to go to keep local control, but to provide some guidance on what some of the expectations would be, and to really create boards such as the one you're referring to.
Thank you. I think that the bill that seems to, I get the most questions about, and I never get questions. People call me, just because I have planning and zoning in my commission's name, that I know a lot more about it than others. But Senate Bill 804, Senator Anwar's bill, desegregate Connecticut and so forth, that in its purest sense, it seems to me, with the inability of towns to regulate where these types of projects may be constructed, it almost leaves the design of the town up to the will of developers. They find the opportunities for themselves without any guidance or input from the towns. They shoehorn it or leverage it into that location, whether it's appropriate or not. And the town has little to say, not even to regards to parking concerns, which is an ongoing, you've got it forever type of problem that cannot even be addressed or rectified. I don't think that's anywhere that, a road we want to go down. And as far as affordable housing is concerned, I know in our particular case, we don't have as much as we'd like, I think, as others said, but as Peter said, we're working on it. We're trying to find ways to do it. And as an example, just within the past couple of weeks, I saw John, Michael, and Christine down on Cottage Lane at a project that planning and zoning was involved in here and approved. And Dave Anderson did a yeoman's job making this project work and bringing it to Madison, and that should not go unnoticed or unpassed. And that was 23 units, I think, of affordable housing being brought into the town of Madison. So we're trying to do our part, and I think we're doing it under the circumstances fairly well. And have the state come in and take it all away, or most of it away, is almost mind-boggling. And I would hope that I think that a large percentage of the folks here in Madison that are aware of this legislation feel the same as I do, that home rule, home control is vitally important, particularly in a town like ours, where we pride ourselves on our community and don't want to see it accommodating, but not drastically altered. And I think we'd lose that balance. I also see, there's some parts of it about training for P&Z and land use officials. I think that's good. In fact, we do it ourselves. The commission's attending an all-day seminar on Saturday given by the Connecticut Bar Association on land use policy. I don't know what other towns do, but education is never, a bad thing. But I think that, and I would hope that, Senator Cohen, you are in a little different situation than John Michael, that you have, kind of a suburban urban town that you represent like Brantford, whose feelings may be completely different than Guilford or Madison or Durham or North Brantford. So you answer to a few more, you have a few different types of clients, I guess is the proper way to put it, than John Michael does. So I don't know how you come down, but I would hope at the very least that if you see the advantage of home rule and the need for home rule, the benefit of it, that you would not just vote no if it comes before the legislature, but actively fight it or oppose it, so that the folks up there in Hartford know more than know how you feel. And try and influence the ultimate outcome, if that's possible. That was a lot, but I had to say it. Thank you.
I do think it's possible, Rod, and I think it's great hearing from all of you. So John Michael and I can go back to Hartford and share some of these concerns with our colleagues. But again, I do think a lot of our colleagues share these concerns that you have. They are representing towns that also want sort of home rule, as you say. And while I do represent different types of communities, some with higher percentages of affordable housing than others, I would say that that sentiment remains, right? That they want to be able to decide what is right for their community, and not have the state imposing those decisions on them. So that being said, just like I said before, I think the key is balance here and showing that we're making progress, opening up communities to folks that, for new opportunity, creating jobs, allowing for, better education, and things of that nature. So I think that's going to be the key to this: is how do we do that? How do we move forward and show that those concerns are in everybody's minds in municipalities across the state. It certainly is the case here in Madison. As you mentioned, John Michael and I went and saw the project. Wellington, and I think that's going to be a great project and a terrific addition for the town of Madison. Guilford has a couple of similar projects going on right now, and we're seeing some additional affordable housing going up in Brantford as well. And then I have 3 very rural communities, and so what affordable housing looks like in Durham is very different as well. So anyway, I think your point is well taken. I'm hearing it loud and clear. And again, I think there are many others that share your concern. And we'll try and figure out a way to strike that balance. And as I said, this is still early in the process, and these bills go through many iterations. But what I was hearing even in 2020, when our session was abbreviated and this 2 was on the table, was a similar sentiment that this should still be up to local planning and zoning boards, but we need to figure out a way to bring more affordable housing into communities that have extremely low percentages.
Thank you.
Senator Cohen, just one additional question that I've got, because I also very much like Peter believe in having diverse economic base of constituents within a town, in having affordable housing, because it just keeps the town robust in and of itself. The one thing I've always struggled with is the definition of affordable housing, in that it needs to have a deed restriction on the property. And I was wondering if that's still going to be going forward in new proposals, and only because I think it's an economic disadvantage to the people that buy that property, because the way that traditionally you start to move into larger housing is you buy a small place, you fix it up, you sell it for a profit more than you bought it for, you move up to the next level of house, etc. And your appreciation typically will stay pace with the market. With the formula that's in the affordable housing deed restriction, you could very easily lose pace with the market. So your investment in the house appreciates at far less than market rates. So I just would be interested in either your thoughts or, as you talk to your peers, how that weighs into, the long-term benefit of the people that are in the buy cycle, for affordable housing.
Thanks, Tom, for that question. I would never profess to be an expert on this, and far from it. I'm, just learning about all of this. Was never on a planning and zoning commission, and so I really appreciate that comment, and I can look into that further. Does that apply, do you think, to mixed use properties as well, where it's a combination of affordable units and market rate units?
It only applies to I think it only applies to the unit that's listed as affordable, because the deed restrictions on that one property. Okay. And so that's one of the things that I would ask you to even ask your peers to become educated upon. What is the long-term economic impact for the purchaser, and how do they get to monetize the investment they're making in that affordable housing if their appreciation doesn't follow market appreciation. Now, that hasn't been a real issue for a couple of years now in our housing market, with the exception of the COVID spike. But it's a real concern that I have, that you're putting people in a disadvantaged situation that they might not fully appreciate, because you typically don't buy a house keeping in mind or thinking that you're going to sell it in 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Thanks for that.
It's a good point, Tom. And you think about it, it's really not a heck of a lot different than renting. You don't enjoy the appreciation, and the market takes off and leaves you in the dust. And I would assume, could also say the same could be held for portable rentals, that the rentals are so affordable that it's over time, it's a huge jump to go and move to sort of category of less affordable housing. I'm not sure that that's a proper term, but to move out, because you've just, got, it's spread out more. Another thing I thought of, and this is more on the big picture with the legislation like the Senate bill. We're in a state that, unfortunately, except maybe for the COVID blip, has a declining population. And businesses are not knocking down our doors to move in, unfortunately. So if this affordable housing concept were to take off and become successful, meaning a lot of units would appear around the state, who's going to fill the vacuum in the cities, for the most part, that these people leave? Who's going to move into those units? How are the cities going to benefit from that? I don't know whether that's been looked at, but you look at the benefits of moving in. What are the potential problems of those folks moving out of, again, primarily the larger communities in the cities? Who's going to take over those properties? It's probably something that hadn't been thought of, but should be taken into account, I would think, or at least have a plan.
Yeah, and I think the hope is that we'll be attracting folks from other states as well. But it is your point's well taken.
It's a very, very difficult question, and no matter what level, I think you look at it, from ours or yours or at the federal level, it's not an easy one to solve. But I'm glad you're paying attention to it, and Senator, I like your outlook on it, or your open-minded view of the downside potentially of it. And oh no, we haven't heard from all the commissioners. I just want to make sure, is anybody in disagreement about the kind of concerns we have? I don't want you to remain silent, particularly if you think there's another perspective that should be shared.
Not necessarily another perspective, Ron, but I think one of the things that's important to note. Can you guys hear me okay? Because my audio's on the phone. Okay. So I think a couple things that are important to note. So obviously it's an important issue to tackle. We've made some efforts, even before there were mandates. We've made some, I guess, for lack of a better word, organic efforts on this commission over the last 10 years or so to move more into a direction where for the things that we can control from a planning and zoning perspective, to encourage affordable housing in town. That's certainly important. And I think it's for those of us, who are kind of on the outlying areas, if you will, from Hartford. I think my concern is a one-size-fits-all kind of solution coming out of the state. And we are certainly not a poster child for affordable housing in this town, but we're also not as exclusive as it might seem from Hartford, or certainly from guys of folks in San Francisco. I mean, we have retail workers that live and work in town. We have teachers that live and work in town. We have firefighters that live and work in town, policemen that live and work in town. So, I mean, there is a higher cost of living in this town in terms of acquiring property, but it's not so exclusive that none of the people who provide services in town are able to actually live in the town. Certainly we can do better, but it's not, there's no fence around the town, that really makes it, unachievable for people to buy into town. In the last several years, it's become more and more affordable. Obviously that's based on certain income thresholds, but even when you look at the affordable housing criteria for someone to qualify for affordable housing in this town, that's a pretty significant income for a family to qualify for affordable housing based on the means and the medians. So I think it's important that we maintain the local rules, as Ron's calling it, have the opportunity, as Peter's saying, to demonstrate that we are taking earnest efforts to achieve these important objectives, but also avoid at all costs any one-size-fits-all mandates, and certainly sure will be unfunded mandates coming out of the state.
Let me ask a couple more. Elliot,
Ron,
go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to share two maybe points of perspective. And one is that, I think sometimes people assume that, that the town opposes higher density project because they're concerned about affordability or the type of people, that might come to live in those units. But to be truthful, folks are just concerned about density at times, and it's not anything to do with affordability. And so we have projects that are proposed now and have been proposed recently that are by no means affordable. They're just higher density than people are comfortable with. And those are the ones, honestly, that get met with the most resistance before this board. So we've had affordable projects that have sailed right through, higher density affordable projects because they're in the right location. But the projects that are pushing density in areas that are traditionally more single family home oriented are the ones that we really struggle with. And so I worry a little bit that I think folks are making an assumption that these towns are fighting affordability, and I'm not sure that's the case. I think they're trying to balance appropriate density with environmental protection, with everything else. And certainly I don't think just promoting high density development is going to provide the quality of life for residents of those units that they really deserve. So I think, we really need to think about, is density really the answer? Is density at all costs the answer, I guess is my question. And then, another perspective that I have is, and I think, Tom might have alluded to this a little bit, I'm not sure that relying on the private market and developers to provide affordable housing is the right way to go about this. I think encouraging towns to develop plans and then eventually, requiring those towns to maybe have some skin in the game to implement those plans and to encourage more not-for-profit developers to come and help with this, I think would be a better path forward, because I think those people have a genuine interest in trying to make sure that the type of housing is going to best serve those tenants, versus just trying to squeak out as much profit as they can get. And so I'm continually concerned that some of these bills don't seem to understand those two things. They think density is the solution and that the private market will do it and that'll solve the problem. And, I'm just not certain that's going to be the case.
Yeah, and Dave, I think that, being as creative as possible in terms of how to solve the problem is critically important. Because one of the unintended consequences of density and requiring density is infrastructure cost. So there's 169 towns in the state. I'm not sure how many have public sewers, but Madison is not one of them. So that's a big concern. And with public water is also not universally available. So you do have to worry about well capacity, wells running dry, the ability to handle in an environmental way septic waste, because we're not going to build out sewers unless it's mandated, and that's just going to raise taxes and make living here even more unaffordable. So those are some considerations, but I think, Dave's onto something in terms of being creative and looking for non-legislative approaches or non-legislative approaches that are more incentive-based than regulation-based would be, I think, a great approach.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think some of the legislative proposals, are really getting at trying to get towns to be creative as well, right? Creative about what does affordable housing look like for Madison? Is it, creating multi-family units, more of them? Is it, like I talked about a bill earlier, these accessory dwelling units? Is that, is it making a percentage of a new development require a small percentage of that new development to be affordable? And so thinking a little bit outside the box, I know, Madison is particularly desirable. It has, right in town, it has a transit system, the train station right there, very close to all of the shops, easy to get to jobs and what have you. And I think, from a housing standpoint, folks who are, really wanting to get affordable housing into certain towns, Madison would be high on the list, right? A fantastic education system, beautiful place to live in proximity to the water, and wonderful outdoor recreation available, and a terrific Main Street and jobs available with a train station right in the center. So how does Madison, creatively come at this? And I think, the board, that you've developed on affordable housing will help make those determinations. But I think you're right. On the legislative side, we can get a little bit more creative about how do we incentivize towns to really do this and provide for enabling legislation.
And one of the ideas from a creative standpoint that I pitched was to partner with financial services community, the banks that are doing business in writing mortgages, along with the town and state, to do a cost buy down for a potential purchaser, and have that buy down be part of the a lien on a deed, so that the town has a little skin in the game. You're helping write down the cost or what they're going to have to outlay in terms of a mortgage. And when they sell that house at the market appreciated rates, they pay that money back in almost a kind of a self-funding loop over a period of time. And I think that, to me, that's a way that trades off the cost of infrastructure, so you could eliminate the need for the infrastructure, and you put it into a almost like micro loans, if you will, and you're putting money and investing in people, and the town is guaranteed to get their money back as a first lien holder, but it also takes some work with the financial community to make sure that they would recognize and place a mortgage on that particular property, along with, as long as the because the town would be the first lien holder. So that's just one example of a creative approach that doesn't increase density, doesn't change a community's nature, provides affordability, and could be self-sustaining over the long run.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, but I'm familiar with a similar program on the environmental side with Green Bank to say electric vehicles, where you do
very similar.
down.
I think I patented that idea, by the way.
Yeah. Elliot, what are your thoughts?
I don't have a whole lot more to add. I think Joel did a perfect job describing how I would feel, and like the Dave's opinion of, as far as trying to be creative and potentially, getting nonprofits involved to make it happen. Seems most developers want to build on a larger scale and larger cost basis. So I think the nonprofit approach would be a great way to go.
Thank you. Dr. Head, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I think everyone's expressed things very well. I would say, I think even more, and sort of talking to the point that Joel was making, I think Madison does have quite a bit of economic diversity, more than I think, as he mentioned, people in Hartford might realize. But I think what we really suffer from is a lack of racial and ethnic diversity, and that is, from my standpoint, I have friends and colleagues who don't want to move to Madison because it is so homogenous. And I think that's something, when we're thinking about how we might try to attract different types of people here, if we can get creative in seeing if we can get people who don't, all look like most of the people on this call, I think that would actually go a long way to attracting, other families to come live in Madison in the future.
Okay. Anyone else? John Mathers?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. I think a couple things. One, I do want to kind of underscore the comment that Joel made, and actually that Senator Cohen brought up, which really is, we shouldn't have something imposed on us that is a one-size-fits-all. And the fact is, Madison is different from several other communities. It is attractive. It is more expensive to live here because of the demand. So I think that has to be recognized, that some communities are different, and we're not going to get us looking like every other community in the state. The other thing that, until Tom had brought up his concept with the mortgage plan, In terms of allowing affordable housing units to participate in the appreciation of market value or market rate dwellings, I think that we have to be careful there, because if I'm paying one price at market rate, somebody can come in, it's really subsidized housing, and they're getting the benefit. I think that a plan that would allow them to benefit in the future along the line of, I think, what Tom had brought up with his creative idea, maybe would be the way to do that. But I do think that it's not bad to have some deed restrictions when housing is provided at a below market rate. So I guess that's it. It'll be interesting to see how this legislation proceeds and how people actually vote on it. I'm hoping that what comes out is something that does provide us with some incentives, but not mandates to do more than we're doing. And I think we are addressing a lot of the issues that some of the legislation is trying to solve. I think we need to move faster than we are. And I'm happy that Peter Roos is on the committee that's looking at that. And I think we can have some good solutions.
Thank you, Jim. John Mathers. Anything to say? Add?
Yeah, thank you, Ron. No, I don't have a lot to add because I'm no expert on the subject, and I thought this conversation was very educational. I just learned a lot in the last 45 minutes, so I appreciate it. I thought Tom made some very good points. I thought Dave's points were excellent as well, and everyone contributed. I guess the one thing I would stress is that from my perspective, there's a sense of urgency that needs to be conveyed about this problem. I think the last year, with the way real estate prices have increased in not just Madison, but all over the area, it's really exacerbated the problem. In fact, I have one very valuable employee of mine who lives locally, whose husband owns a business locally, and they're preparing to move to Florida because their landlord decided to sell their condo and they can't afford they can't find an affordable place to live. So it's a very real problem for people, and it hits home in a number of ways. I happen to work in a business that employs a lot of people, and I have a very difficult time finding people that live locally that will work for me. So the people that do work for me, have to commute in from other communities, and sometimes by public transportation. It's a hardship on them. So I agree that it's not a cookie cutter solution. It's obviously a very complex issue, as illustrated by the conversation tonight. And I hope no one would support. I can't see how anyone would support putting the solution at the state level.
Thanks, John. Giselle, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have much to add at all, if any. I too find this whole discussion very interesting. I think I'm just absorbing and taking everything in, really learning a lot, and a lot has even I wouldn't say changed my perspective, but just listening to all the comments, you really get a broader sense of advantages, challenges, opportunity in this whole affordable housing initiative. It's interesting just to see how it all works and how does it work. I mean, there is no one size fits all. All these cities in Connecticut, they have their own charm. And how do you implement across the board when you have such different communities, different towns in and of itself? So it'd be interesting to see which angle this all comes in at. And one thing Tom pointed out that really stuck was when he mentioned, just lost train of thought, but what is, what are we trying to repair? What are we trying to change? What are we trying to fix? Where's the momentum, coming from? So it'd be interesting to see which angle they come in at.
Thank you.
A good question, Giselle.
Excellent. Ron Bodenson, we haven't heard from you.
I'm like a couple others, all ears. I appreciate the input and conversation. I live in Windermere, and I think the development that Dave was referring to originally was a for-profit large condo development. It didn't do well. And then suddenly they sold to, or proposed selling to a not-for-profit and putting in affordable housing. I think it was the first vote on the committee approving that, and the Windermere community welcomes it. And I was glad to see the photo in the paper that it might get done in the next couple of years. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Carol Snow, I know this is all new to you, but I didn't want to shut you out from adding any thoughts or comments or even questions you might have about what we've talked about.
Thank you for including me. I'm also all ears. And one of my sources recently was a New York Times article about the affordable housing issues in Connecticut. So I agree, it will be interesting to see how it all works out. And I think education is key, obviously, and how, I don't know, Peter, what your ad hoc committee will be doing with it, but it'll be really great to follow it.
Thank you, Carol. Any other comments or questions from the commission?
Ron, oh, sorry, go ahead, Joel.
No,
Yes, Joel.
go ahead, Dave. I'll come in behind you.
Well, I was going to actually just try to switch gears just for a minute. So if you have one more comment on this topic, go ahead.
Sure. So I think while we're looking at this as a local problem, and indeed it is on a lot of levels, I hope that when, in Senator Cohen, Representative John Michael Parker, really appreciate you guys being here. And I hope that when you go back to Hartford and you start listening and deliberating on these matters, that someone, and maybe it can be you, is encouraging the state to drive some creativity in making the state affordable, to have businesses come back or come in or stay. Because having the good jobs here is a critical component of affordable housing. So we really need to make the state more welcoming to businesses so that they stay and people can continue to have these jobs in at every end of the income spectrum. Because without the jobs, it doesn't matter what we do on the local.
Good point. Thanks, Joel. Dave?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, since Christine and John Michael, and we probably don't want to keep them too much longer, but since they're both on the Environment Committee, I wanted to give them an opportunity to maybe talk about some of the stuff that they'd like us to know about from their committee, from their perspective, and we have a quick dialogue about that, and then probably let them go shortly and get back to work.
Good idea. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, well, go ahead, Joe Michael.
Well, I was just going to say, I'll let the chair talk because Christine knows what's actually going on in the Environment Committee. And then I'll offer some thoughts at the end about the whole conversation we've had.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much more to add beyond the coastal resiliency. That's a huge piece of all of this, and certainly pertains to all of the good work that you're doing here on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Providing opportunities for towns to save for coastal resiliency, planning, for sea level rise, ensuring that we are responsibly erecting buildings in places that are not going to be impacted by sea level rise. And, what are we doing to shore up that coastline, and really mitigate disaster, in the event of another superstorm such as Sandy. And so working really hard on that, I introduced a bill that would provide towns with the ability to invest funds that are set aside for this purpose through the Office of the State Treasurer, sort of eliminating another barrier to growing those funds and investing those funds. And so I'm hopeful for that, for its passage this session. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of pieces around climate adaptation in the governor's bill, which will be heard before the committee on Monday, actually. So a lot of pieces in there that provide opportunities for municipalities to save and plan either for land preservation or for coastal resiliency. And so I think that's a really important piece. I know that there's also a piece in there, there's that, FEMA has the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities grant, and there's pieces in the governor's bill that will get us prepared to enact, provide communities with the ability to act on some of those grants out of FEMA, which will be important to towns like Madison. So I'll be listening intently on Monday as this comes to public hearing, and then we'll make the changes necessary to move things through process. But that's really what we're thinking a lot about. I know, Dave, you've been particularly interested in the sewage treatment systems, and that bill has been raised again in the Planning and Development Committee. I can tell you there's a lot of opposition to that, increasing the maximum gallons per day. The opposition comes from a variety of sources. Alternative treatment systems are of concern to environmentalists. They feel like, while they're supposed to be better, they haven't been fully vetted. There's some concern between two agencies, DEEP and DPH, and who needs to be developing regs, and it hasn't been done yet for systems under 5,000 gallons per day. And so how will they, how will they manage those and move forward with larger systems? So I do know that particular bill has an uphill climb and has for the past several years. But that's another thing that we're watching closely, especially for this town.
Just two follow-up comments on what you said. So one was the finance director and I met recently, and she's trying to get the town to establish a coastal resiliency fund this year. So we're hopeful to try to do that in the next few months. And as Christine said, there might be opportunities if the town chose to enact a buyer's conveyance fee and funnel additional money into that fund. And in my work with the Coastal Resiliency Commission, we're starting to try to wrap our heads around kind of the amount of resiliency funding that the town might need going forward. And certainly it's a little bit daunting when you think about, having to elevate roads and repair seawalls and revetments and all those types of things. So any kind of creative financing mechanisms we can implement to prepare for that, because I don't think, FEMA is going to be able to help us, 100% going forward. So we're really going to have to figure out a way to be, resilient on our own. And then just to a comment about the septic. So, you guys have, heard, and you're going to actually get an application for a project that Jerry Davis is proposing off of Bradley Road. And that project actually is basically coming forward only because the state increased the ability to put, a septic system in that would be approved by the Department of Public Health rather than the DEP. So they increased it from a maximum of 5,000 gallons per day, which is about 33 bedrooms, to a maximum of 7,500 gallons per day, which is about 50 bedrooms. And because of the difficulty and the time involved in getting a treatment system approved through DEP, it kind of rendered the project infeasible at at 50 bedrooms with a DEP system. But because it's regulated under the Department of Public Health, it actually made that possible. So those changes do have an impact, and I understand there's certainly, environmental considerations that need to be flushed out anytime you look at those thresholds. I get a little bit frustrated because when you read that regulation, it's per lot. It's not per acre or per so many thousand square feet. So a half-acre lot is treated the same as a 50-acre lot, which from an environmental standpoint is kind of absurd, but that's what it says. And so I think just the fact that the state is continually looking at that, I think is going to benefit Madison in the long run. So.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to the resiliency piece as well, because I was actually on the phone with Joe McDougall today, who I know many of you know, and he's just a terrific asset to the town of Madison, but to really the state of Connecticut and all of his work on resiliency efforts. And there is a group out of Yukon, Circa, that has been working. It's a federally funded group that works on resiliency efforts in Bridgeport and Fairfield in particular. And so we're going to be having conversations about trying to secure more federal funding to allow for that planning to expand. It's actually in the governor's bill to allow towns to work with Circa on some of these resiliency projects, but we simply, they don't have the authority to do so. They're in existence purely from a federal opportunity, federal funding for these particular towns. So grateful that, well, it's not our district Congress person, Rosa DeLauro, who, is District 3's congressperson, is now head of appropriations, and we'll be having some meetings with her after, Joe brought an opportunity to my attention, as well as Commissioner Dykes of the DEEP, through this bill, if we can work together with the governor's office and the federal government, just to provide some more funding for towns, and as I mentioned, to work with Circa, and as I mentioned, this Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities grant that is an effort out of FEMA will be incredibly helpful for a town like Madison.
Sounds encouraging. Anything else, Dave, that you had?
No, I think we should give John Michael a chance to. I think he has
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing all that, Christina, for that great work. And I appreciate everyone that's shared comments and thoughts with us tonight. It's really, really helpful to inform our, ability to represent going forward. Like Carol, I also grew up in Madison, graduated from Hand, and have been someone that has, thought about and has entered the housing market, living right around the corner from Mr. Madison here on Morgantown. And so, to go back to where this conversation started, I see the work as, which a lot of us have talked about in different ways, of trying to make sure that Madison is an accessible and inclusive community where our families and our employees or people we work with are able to live and prosper here. And, obviously that's a very high level way of thinking, and it then gets into the details. So I look forward to coming back to this committee and having some more of those detailed conversations about what ends up getting into these proposals. I don't want to take the whole time to go through it now, as was referenced before. At the what is it, 804, right?
Yep.
Which has some very broad language, and then is going to get some bones on it. Talks about some very specific changes around the transit-oriented space downtown and Main Street. I know that they, as of right, is one of the big issues in there, and so that's something I want to learn more about, certainly, and talk to you folks, and maybe a follow up with Ron and Dave and anyone else afterwards, to see what the impacts of those would be, because I think finding a way to, finding a way for the state to offer best practices, and then to, leave it up to the, great public servants like you all that volunteer your time, and then our great town officials like Dave, who is as Ron said before, done such great work on everything from the affordable project that I and Christine got to walk into the other day to, all the other stuff and all the conversations today we've even had this legislative session. I think that's the goal. And so as we get, when the rubber meets the road with the numbers that get into 804 and what the actual proposals will be, I think that's where we'll have some really rich conversations. And so I just thank everyone for the overall thoughts and approach, and would love to be able to understand the details a little bit better as it comes through the session.
Thank you, John Michael. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Well, on behalf of the commission, Senator and Representative, thanks so much for your time, your help, your information, and maybe above and beyond all, thanks for listening to us. I hope we were of some help and assistance, giving you some reasonable input. So thank you again.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. And please keep in touch. Reach out via email or telephone. Happy to hear from you and hear you weigh in as this makes its way through, through the process.
We appreciate that very much, and have a good evening.
You too.
Thanks,
guys.
Bye, folks.
Hey, Ron, this is Tom. I'm going to need to depart.
Yeah, I hope you feel better, Tom.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for as long as you did.
Thanks.
Tom had a little minor surgery today, and it's a little lagging a little bit behind under the weather. So hope he gets better soon. Okay, that was interesting. And thanks to all of you for your thoughts and sharing that information with Christine and John Michael. I hope they got something from it. I know I did, and I hope we all did. Next on the agenda is, let's see, review draft correspondence regarding potential opportunity areas. Dave, that's something you have.
Yeah, so I think what I'd like to do is just first remind the commission, this is maybe just a few months ago now, as some of these applications recently have delayed a little bit of our planning initiatives, but we have reviewed, and this is a little bit for Carol's benefit too, so I give a little bit more thorough of an explanation. We had adopted a regulation called the Planned Development District Regulation, which basically provides for a more flexible opportunity for development of properties 2 acres and over that are residentially zoned and meet certain criteria. And so the commission endeavored to try to identify what properties would we consider to be opportunity areas that we might want to include in our plan of conservation and development for consideration. So over a couple meetings, we reviewed a bunch of different properties, talked about different ways to approach it, and ultimately we came up with about 15 areas that we thought would be a first cut that we think made sense. And so ultimately, in order for these folks to be, or these properties to be able to be eligible to submit a planned development district application, we need to amend the plan of conservation and development, which is a process that requires obviously public hearing, but also notification to the Board of Selectmen for input and also our local council of government. So it's a serious process. It's not something to be taken lightly. Our next step in that process was to notify the property owners that we identified as us wanting to include, and letting them know that we think their property may be may merit consideration as an opportunity area, but that it was going to be up to them to decide whether or not they wanted us to bring it forward. So I drafted a letter, and maybe Ron, instead of reviewing the letter tonight, I'll just email it out to everybody, and then maybe by the end of the next week, I'll compile all the comments and send out a final version. I think that'll be easier than trying to read through it tonight. But I guess what I'd like for tonight is to ask if you guys feel it's appropriate to kind of pull the trigger on moving this forward. In the draft letter, I suggested that I'd want to have enough dialogue so that by our meeting in mid-April, that we'd be able to announce, a public hearing in probably May, and solicit input into let's say there's still 15 areas that we're considering as a public hearing. So the question to the commission is, do you guys feel it's appropriate to move forward?
What do you think, folks?
Well, I think it is. I mean, we've had some discussions, certainly looking at different properties. I think we're ready to move.
Thanks, Jim. Anyone else?
Dave,
just
I have a
agree.
question about the draft letter. Does it have a map with it?
No, but Carol, I can give you, and actually I'll send out everything. I'll send out the list just as a reminder to everybody. And if I have time, I'll put together a map. If not, it'll have all the addresses, and you'll recognize by, some of the properties are, by the landmark of the property, you'll recognize it. But I'll send that out when I send the letter.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so then everybody has all the same information.
Right.
So
I agree. I think we're ready to move forward as well.
Okay. Everybody else kind of been agreeing with that?
Yep.
And you're comfortable with that timeline, Dave? I know our plate's a little full with some applications.
Yeah, no, I think it'll work fine. I think our plate as a planning commission is very full, and my individual plate is full as well. But I think we can move this thing forward, at least at this next step. So
Terrific. Good. All right. Good for that. Next item: discuss setback requirements for emergency generators and HVAC equipment. Dave, that's again you.
yeah, and so we can kind of delve into this as deeply or as little as we want, but internally, so this is in the land use department, we've been struggling recently with just administratively dealing with mechanical permit applications. So our regulations require emergency generators and HVAC equipment to adhere to the setbacks. And so what that means is anytime someone tries to pull a mechanical permit in the building department to put in a mini split system or a generator or what have you, they have to come and get zoning approval. We have to review it and make sure it meets the setbacks, and then they can go to the building department. And it causes some delay in the process. And I find myself at times wondering why we're regulating them specifically. I mean, we regulate the house location, and there's a general assumption, and especially these days, that someone may have exterior mechanical appliances in association with that house. I think the initial thinking was, well, they should adhere to the setbacks because it could be disruptive to the neighbors from a noise perspective. And certainly when a generator is running, I think that's probably true. But typically when the generator is running, all the neighbors' generators are running at the same time. And so, and then, the HVAC equipment, I think, over the course of time has improved to where there's not as much noise emitted from those. And so I don't necessarily have a very strong opinion on this. I just want to visit the idea of, do we think that it still makes sense to regulate the location of this equipment on the lot specifically? An alternative would be that we don't necessarily regulate the specific location. So if someone, for some reason, my view is that the majority of people are putting it as close to the house as they can, because it's going to be the most cost-effective solution for them. And now if they have a reason to move it further away, closer to a neighbor, and it does become a nuisance issue, there is some general language in the regulation about, properties not emitting, objectionable noise. So in those circumstances, we could have some teeth for an enforcement issue if it really became a problem. So in some ways, I feel like we're I don't want to say penalizing, because I don't know if that's right, but we're making everybody jump through a lot of hoops. So we catch that, 1 out of 100 guy that's going to be the problem, rather than just dealing with the problem. So I don't know. I'm kind of just opening this up. We don't need to talk a long time, but just open up for general dialogue about what people think about that idea.
Dave, I would, I've got a quick question relative to that, and one observation, having only recently joined the generator club, when power is out, certainly everyone's generator sounds a heck of a lot louder because I have no other ambient noise in my house. I get it. But my question is, is what you're doing and what the zoning office doing, is it redundant to building code? So does code already specify how far a generator or how far fixed HVAC equipment needs to be from the structure? If it does, can we just let code dictate and lighten your load a little bit?
Yeah, it's not, it's, in some ways, yes, it is. I mean, the building code is, I don't know if it's redundant, but it is sometimes in conflict with the building code. So as it is now, we'll say you have to meet the 20-foot side yard setback. And depending on where the house is located, that requirement could conflict with the building code because it puts the unit either too close to the house or near a window or whatever it happens to be. So it's not redundant necessarily. I believe the building code would allow you to put these units further from the house than would typically happen. And if the neighbor wanted to be a pain because they didn't want to hear their generator, they thought their neighbor wouldn't mind, and they put it that close to the property line. I'm not sure that would run afoul of the building code. But there is conflict, I think, between the two codes. So
I think it certainly makes sense to find a way to streamline it and reduce the red tape. I think that the example Dave and Joel just talked about, somebody doesn't want the noise from their generator close to the house, they move it to the rear property line, 200 feet from their house, but 50 feet from their neighbors in the extreme. That's the kind of thing that should be discouraged. I also remember, it wasn't too many years ago, Dave, that there were changes made in some of our zoning. The ZBA was going crazy, granting variances to anybody who needed to put in a generator or a compressor outside right next to the house because it went 6 inches over the setback. And I forget how that was resolved somehow. Maybe it was decided that wasn't a building or a structure, it was equipment but drastically reduced. They were being driven crazy south of the post road with that issue. I remember maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And it seems to have been resolved to the satisfaction of both sides. The ZBA and the neighborhoods. But I'd like to see yes, Ron.
What about this approach? Assuming there is a setback, that is a problem that you all are sort of tired of dealing with. If the property owner gets a letter and a waiver from the adjoining neighbor, then it says we don't care that it violates setback, and you accept that, and then you don't have to focus on it at all. That doesn't help the subsequent owner of the neighbor, but I think there's some value with the town keeping that 1 out of 100 person moving at 200 feet away from their house and close to someone else. I have a generator, it's loud as hell. And I know neighbors 100 feet away can hear it, like I can hear theirs. But maybe a situation where they get the blessing of the neighbor who's setback to encroaching on, that then eliminates the investigation approval by your group.
Well, you're in a condo, right?
We're all freestanding homes.
Yeah,
but it's a condominium area, right?
Do you have your own lot?
No, we do not.
So you don't have a setback.
Don't have a setback. You're right, but the board then is the one who says, "Hey, this is a better place to do it," and enclose it and those kinds of things. But you're right, we're not affected by the lot setback.
Dave, just for clarification.
I think the challenge with that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Carol.
Oh, thanks. The generators you're talking about are permanent fixtures. They're not portable generators. Is that right?
Yes.
Right.
Permanent
and
fixtures.
Are they two different issues then? Because I think of the split HVAC systems, which I think most new construction is going toward is, right next to the house, not so much a noise issue as just a, maybe visual, they're ugly. But I don't know if we require screening. And then whereas the generators seem to be different. So I don't know if there's a way to streamline them separately to make it an easier process.
You could separate them. So they're coupled in our regulations. They're in the same. If you look, there's a chart in the zoning regulation that basically says what's subject to setbacks, what counts for coverage, and they're coupled in that regulation. So they're certainly, that would be one potential solution, is to decouple them.
Yeah, I'd like to pipe in on that because to me, I think that when we're in a mode where we're running our generators, people are probably a little empathetic because of the circumstances that caused the need for generators to begin with. But in terms of HVAC, I know of a situation, and maybe it's one of those 1 in 100 situations, where a very good friend of mine had a neighbor that converted his garage into a studio and added HVAC and put the HVAC along the side of the garage that faced my friend's house. And the noise was so bad that it really ruined his ability to enjoy any relaxation on his deck. And to the point where they ended up selling their house because they couldn't arbitrate with the neighbor. And so I think there is, I would hate to have that happen to me. I've got neighbors on both sides of me that are relatively close. I can't hear their HVAC now, but if they were to make some change or improvement to their house and all of a sudden there's an HVAC unit out there that I have to listen to all the time, I wouldn't like that. So I think that it is something that needs to be looked at. And I don't know. Go ahead.
I guess one of the questions I have, and I don't disagree with, I think that's a good point, John. One of the questions I have is the setback the solution to that problem? I could envision a loud HVAC unit complying with our setback requirements.
It's still being a problem.
Still being a problem. So maybe we need to approach the issue differently, and rather than saying that the setback, adhering to the setback is the solution, we should, say, something about HVAC units placed closer to a property line than required by building code may be considered a nuisance in the event of yada yada yada. And then somebody could complain. We could investigate. We say, yeah, you put your HVAC unit too close to your neighbor, and it's a nuisance. You got to move it.
There may be a way to baffle the sound or something, or move it, or whatever. Yeah.
You want to give it a little more thought, Dave?
Well, yeah, no, I just wanted some, Joel, I'll let you talk in 1 second. I just want to say, I just wanted feedback tonight. I just want to see if this is something, if you guys went, we don't want to change a thing, then that's fine. I think if you say, yeah, well, let's think about it a little more, I'll draft something up for discussion for another meeting.
Joel, you had something Dave said?
Yeah, I think we kind of cracked open a can here, and maybe Dave thought it'd be a quick discussion, but the more we start to kind of peel the skin off this thing, it's getting crazier and crazier. That might be a little overstating, but with setback doing something versus code, or having someone go to the point where their installation is approved and then down the road it's determined to be a nuisance and then they're told they have to move it. I think that's problematic as well. And I think we probably need to put a little intellectual rigor into this to try and come up with something that anticipates a lot of the different potentials. If we're going to try and fix it, then I think it's going to take a bit more work.
Good point.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just a question, Dave, for you. How many cases have come forward, let's say in the past 6 months, that you've had to deal with?
Well, so my initial conversation point was about the permits, so the mechanical permits. So those that are flying in, a couple of days sometimes, in terms of the administration of, the permitting process. The ones that are, the real issues are with, where they violate the setback and they have to get a variance. They're not that frequent.
Okay.
But just the verification that these units meet the setbacks, requires some administrative time in the office. And again, my baseline question is it worth regulating them in that way? So.
And it seems lately Eversource has been doing its very best to help the generator business, right?
Yeah. All right, well, if anybody has any thoughts on this, I guess I'll offer to Joel too. If you have any thoughts, please email me your thoughts and then we can revisit this. And it's nothing urgent. It was just it was a discussion amongst the land use staff this week. So I figured I'd float it tonight.
Good. Let's do that then. Thanks, Dave. That takes it for agenda items. My comments, I don't have any except to remind everyone that Saturday morning, we have our land use seminar. Dave, will you be sending out Zoom links and information prior to that?
I am not, because you were signed up via your email address, so you should have gotten the link today.
I did, yeah.
I got my link around 2 o'clock today, I think, somewhere.
I think I had mine a couple of weekdays ago.
Oh, really? I just got mine today.
Yeah, I got mine today.
I'll have to
It's
check.
from Shirley Perrin, Ron, so search for Shirley Perrin in your email.
Okay. I don't, well, anyway, I hadn't seen it last time I checked late this afternoon. But how many do we have, Dave? Do you recall?
I think it's 14 in total between staff, planning and zoning, and some ZBA folks.
Good. I think it's worthwhile, and I think you'll get a lot out of it, and you'll enjoy it. So that's all. Except, Dave, are you going to be talking about the ledges?
Yes. Well, I'll just talk generically. In 2 weeks from now, we're going to have to roll up our sleeves again, because we're going to have another fairly robust meeting. So we're going to have Longshore Lane, which and I forwarded to the Planning and Zoning Commission. I shouldn't say finally, we have a report from the Inland Wetlands Agency after a couple of rounds there. And then we've had all the previous comment from DEP and from the attorneys representing one of the abutters. And so I think this is going to be, probably a detailed conversation on that topic. Then we have a proposal for a small cluster housing development at 856 Boston Post Road, which is a project known as the Ledges. That project is controversial from a neighbor opposition perspective, or even some general opposition to the project. The good thing about a hearing on that is that it will be continued because the Inland Wetlands Agency hasn't ruled on that project yet. So if it goes too long, we can cry uncle and just continue it another month. And then we'll also have a hearing on Bill Plunkett's application to, he's seeking permission to do the outdoor dining under the tent, kind of in, I should say, in perpetuity. So seasonal, few day a week operation, but he wants to do it beyond COVID. So he was able to do that last year under kind of the COVID, basically flexibility to move the dining that was traditionally inside, outside. So we'll have that hearing as well.
Okay. Will you have a chance between now and then to talk to health and see what they see in the crystal ball and what concerns they might have in this? It's not part of their property. It's a different operation. And if we still maintain separation, yada, yada, what considerations or concerns they might have?
Yeah, so I did send, but prior to us getting the application, I sent it around to the fire marshal and the health director, and I got a little bit of feedback, but I need to get some more. So yes, I will. Okay.
And you also talked though about a site walk at the Ledges. That's really
excuse me, Ron. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, I did talk about that, and I want to look at some calendar dates. I think the commission might benefit from looking at that property because you can view it from the road, but you don't really get a sense of it until you're actually up into the property. So I think we should schedule a site walk if possible prior to our meeting. And so that would probably put us either sometime next week. I don't know if folks feel like a Saturday isn't okay. Saturday at 10 seemed to work for the last site walk we did.
Yeah.
So it would look like probably Saturday, next Saturday, the 13th would be a good possibility.
Could we do it earlier
Earlier in the week, or earlier in the day?
in the day?
Sure.
Yeah,
you have
that's the same thing.
you want to say, what would work for you good, John? Do you have a suggestion?
I'd suggest 9.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Yeah. That works for me.
Nine's good for me too.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think, and I was going to suggest a site walk because I've seen that property, I've toured that property before, and prior to this application, actually about a year or so ago. And when I saw this application, I thought to myself, really, you need to walk up into this property to get a lay of the land. No pun intended. Yeah.
Right. No, I agree with you. So I'll work to schedule, and we'll have to notice this. And so the Inland Wetlands Agency and the Conservation Commission held a site walk. And I let the neighbors know about that because there's been a lot of interest in the project. So I would anticipate, in addition to ourselves and the applicant, we'll probably also have some neighbors joining us. And so I kind of let them know what they should expect in terms of the site walk, that we can't have substantive discussion. We're really just trying to orient ourselves to the site. So we'll just have to maybe remind everybody of that. But I'll work to get this scheduled for 9 a.m. on Saturday, the 13th. And hopefully we have good weather.
And if we don't, it just occurred to me that if the weather happens to be terrible, we have Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday late afternoon, because we
Right.
changed the clocks out Sunday.
Okay.
So 5 o'clock or 5:30 would be doable as a plan B.
Okay. Good idea.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
is this a good time? Is this a good time to remind our newest member that at these site walks, it's the newest member who brings the coffee and donuts and whatnot for all the entire group?
You're thinking the new member has a memory.
I've been doing it for years now, so I'm so happy you're on board.
Ron, I missed those site walks.
Yeah, I must have missed those too.
Yeah.
Hey, I guess maybe more for the chairman and to an extent Dave. Is it possible for us to put a not to exceed time limit on that meeting on the 19th? Because that's going to be, I just anticipate that. I mean, few of us have been in them, right, where we're still sitting around the table in the conference room, 11:30, 12 o'clock. And this one could be one of those ones that just runs away. So I'm wondering if we could just say, hey, well, we mentioned crying uncle, Dave. Can we tag a time where uncle is automatically called?
I think we probably could. I mean, it's certainly the one that's going to be continued, that has to be continued. I think we can put a time limit on that and keep that one a little bit briefer. The Longshore Lane, I think we're going to have a little difficulty. I mean, that one might not run that long, to be honest with you. We just have to control it. And some of the testimony from the attorneys might get a little lengthy. And then, Plunkett's application, if we go around on that one, which I don't know that we will that much, we could, yeah, I think we can control it, Joe. I agree with you. I don't want to go till midnight on those things. So I think we'll have a little bit of control.
Good point, Joel, and I don't think anybody does. I think we can decide that on the fly after we get through with the first one, the second one, and, even send Mr. Plunkett home if he doesn't want to stay that late. I mean, but we can decide then. What's a cutoff time for you, Joel?
Oh, geez,
What show do you want to speak?
I'd really rather be in bed at like 8 o'clock, but I'll extend.
That is a bogey. That'll be the
I'm thinking, on the long end of things, I think 10's probably. I mean, we just get punchy after that anyway, right? So.
No, that's true. And some of it is case management, because I expect, Dave, am I correct, that the meeting after that, we may have the Bradley Road application to deal with.
Yeah,
So
so
now-
we'll have the ledges back,
We're kicking a can down the road.
and then we'll have the Bradley Road application. Yeah, so.
So we'll bite off as much as we can, but sensitive to your point, Joel, and it's a good one.
Dave, what's the address of the ledges again?
856 Boston Post Road. Are you familiar with that is? So it's really off of,
It's off that
We
frontage
call it-
road?
we call it locally Birnbaum Lane. Yeah, the road that's parallel to Boston Post Road heading out of downtown. I'm told it's actually officially Old Boston Post Road. But there's you'll see a house up on the hill, and there's a little sign on the stone wall that says The Ledges. So it's that house on the hill with the driveway to the right of the house. That's the property.
I think it was built
Is it
around
vacant?
1900.
No, there's a house on the property currently, a big white
Occupied?
house. Yeah, and I sent you guys the legal notice, and that contained the site plan. So if you pull that open, you'll be able to orient yourself pretty easily.
Carol, you've been there, right?
I have, yeah.
I think that was the straw hat thing we did a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful house built around
Really?
1905, I think.
It's a beautiful house. Yeah, it really is.
Faith Whitehead is the owner, for any of you know her, and is a bit of useless information. There was a movie filmed here in Madison, 10 or 15 years ago, called The Harvest, and Robert Lozier was in it. There's one name I remember, and they spent 6 weeks around town. There were scenes from the coffee shop and all over the place, the surf club, and but the house that was used in the movie in the set was the Ledges home. Cool. So if you instead of the site walk, watch the movie The Harvest, you got your bases covered. So anyway, that's all you have, Dave?
That's it.
Okay, anything else anyone has?
Yeah, I had a question.
Okay, go ahead. You go ahead, Ron.
Mike, I just wondered, Dave, did the governor's loosening of restrictions today, does it give any indication or suggestion when we as a group can meet in person again? Or have you seen those?
I looked at them very briefly, and I didn't see anything about that. We had a little bit of a discussion internally about it, because there's some thought that if the emergency declaration goes away, whatever it is, April 19th, that we'd be meeting in person again. But we'd be required to potentially do hybrid meetings, so we'd be in person, but some people could participate via Zoom. I think we have to really figure that out, because that has the potential to go very poorly in the beginning. So I'm as eager to get off of Zoom as anybody else, but I think we may limp along on Zoom until we're sure that we have a hybrid solution that's going to meet our needs, because I think it's going to open up opportunity for appeal of some applications, just because the process might get more complicated. So I think we'll probably be on Zoom for at least a few more months.
Good. All right.
Someone else had a question?
Yeah, I just had a comment I'd like to make. I'm not sure who else picked up on this, but I don't think it should go without noting that when Senator Cohen was discussing septic systems, Dave made the comment that there were concerns that needed to be flushed out.
Yes.
And I just want you to know I've noticed it. Appreciate that comment.
I thought he said fleshed out.
Anything else from anyone? All right, well, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Second, Ron, thank you. All in favor? I don't need to ask. Have a good evening, and we'll see you, we can see you Saturday on the Zoom.
Yep.
And a week from Saturday at the Ledges.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Great.
Thanks. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Good night.